Do any of you remember how you died in your past life? Personal experience. In an attempt to revisit my past lives, I had a vision that placed me in the Victorian era, sitting in a grand office, relentlessly drinking alcohol. Suddenly, everything went black, and my soul felt like it was flying upwards. It's strange to think that I might have succumbed to alcohol, possibly reflecting unresolved struggles from my previous existence. This is just one glimpse into my past. I can't help but laugh, as the scene is eerily reminiscent of struggles in my current life. Reflections on Victorian deaths and possible causes. A commenter noted that during the Victorian era, the use of various poisons and narcotics was widespread, leading to the possibility that my sudden death might have involved more than just alcohol. It's intriguing to imagine that something like an allergic reaction or poisoning might have played a role. One user reflected on the sensitivity some people have to alcohol, drawing a parallel to a friend who is dangerously allergic to it. They shared a harrowing tale of how this friend nearly died after unknowingly consuming alcohol at a restaurant. The thought of dying from an allergic reaction struck a chord, especially with the uncertainty of my vision. Memories from childhood. Several others in the discussion shared memories that began in childhood, particularly of familial loss. One user described being a young child, repeatedly recounting how their daughter from a past life had fallen into a well and died. The memory was vivid enough that their grandmother wrote it down in a diary before passing away, a relic of a history that seems to transcend time. Drowning in a past life. A recurrent theme in past life visions is death by drowning. Some users vividly recounted traumatic drownings in bathtubs or being caught in tsunamis. One individual detailed a vision of wearing Victorian clothing and being drowned by someone whose face they never saw. Another user recalled witnessing a volcanic explosion in Japan, with water rushing up unexpectedly, leading to their demise in a tsunami. These haunting recollections left an indelible mark on their lives, fostering a deep fear of water that persists to this day. Trauma and war. For many, visions of past lives included wartime experiences, particularly in World War I and the Sound. One individual remembered dying in an ambush during World War I, while another described recurring dreams of being shot during an Australian war. These dreams were vivid, leaving behind a lingering fear of heights or violence in their current lives. The sensation of flying upwards after death is a recurring experience for many who recount past life regressions. One user shared that after being shot during a battle, they floated upwards, only to reflect on the brevity of life. It's a perspective echoed by several others who recall similar moments of peace and reflection as their souls departed their bodies. Familial and emotional connections. A prominent feature of these past life memories is the strong emotional attachment to loved ones. One user described their final moments before death as a lonely Victorian gentleman in a hospital, holding the hand of a nurse, reflecting on a life filled with wealth but devoid of family. Unusual deaths. Beyond the common themes of drowning, war, and illness, some users recalled more unusual or fantastical deaths. One user described being shot by a laser on a spaceship while hiding from lizard-like creatures, with a specific focus on their right eye, which interestingly correlates with vision problems they've had in this life. Another remembered a death in ancient Rome, stabbed by a blonde assailant on horseback after fleeing with their lover from a controlling father. The memories of these experiences are as vivid as they are surreal, blending elements of fantasy and reality in a way that leaves one questioning the boundaries of past life regression. Hey everyone! If you've ever had a past life experience or felt drawn to unexplained fears and memories, I'd love to hear about it. Have you ever had a vision that felt too real to ignore? Let's dive into these mysteries together. Share your story in the comments below. And if you're intrigued by these deep, reflective journeys into past lives and personal growth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Let's explore these hidden parts of ourselves, one story at a time. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new discovery. Historical contexts and recurring themes. The memories people shared spanned a wide range of historical contexts, from the ancient Roman era to the more recent tragedies of the 20th century, such as the Holocaust. One user recalled dying in Auschwitz during a cruel experiment, while another remembered being a victim of British or Irish men, possibly during a political or sectarian conflict. Themes of betrayal and violence also featured heavily in many people's memories. Some recounted being killed for refusing arranged marriages or for political reasons, while others recalled being murdered in the chaos of castle sieges or ancient battles. One striking memory involved a siege where a boulder was dropped, crushing the individual, a death that seemed to connect with childhood memories of playing with toy castles. Existential reflections on reincarnation. Some users reflected deeply on the philosophical implications of their past life memories. One individual recounted a lifetime as an indigenous woman killed by a white man, only to be reborn as a white person in this life. They mused on the idea of reincarnation as a way to experience different perspectives and understand the dualities of existence: light and dark, good and evil, hunter and hunted. Others shared a similar sense of existential wonder, contemplating whether their past lives were a way to learn lessons about compassion, power, or survival. One user who remembered being stoned to death in the Middle East now lives in the Pacific Northwest, carrying with them a fear of disappointing people. Another reflected on their life as a Roman guard, fleeing from an angry father who disapproved of their relationship, only to be stabbed from behind. These memories, whether real or imagined, seem to provide individuals with a deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world. They offer a sense of continuity, a thread that weaves through lifetimes, connecting the past with the present. A shared experience of catharsis. For many, the process of remembering past lives was cathartic. One user shared how they cried for hours after their first regression, overwhelmed by the intensity of the memories. Another described how they felt a sense of resignation rather than fear when they were stabbed in ancient Rome. These moments of reflection, often sparked by past life regressions, seem to offer a kind of emotional release and understanding. Ultimately, the memories of past lives, whether fantastical or grounded in history, provide a window into the human experience. They speak to our deepest fears, our most profound connections, and the lessons we carry with us from one lifetime to the next. The Forgotten Tale of the Sea Captain, a haunting ocean memory. I've always been inexplicably drawn to the sea, though the thought of deep water fills me with dread. I've never been able to swim well, and every time I'm near the ocean, I feel this overwhelming sense of loss. During a past life regression, I saw myself standing on the deck of a massive ship, the wind howling, waves crashing against the hull. I was a sea captain, steering through a violent storm. I remember shouting orders to my crew, but then there was a deafening crack. Lightning struck the mast, and the ship started breaking apart. The last thing I saw was the ocean rising up to swallow me whole. It was like the sea was claiming me, pulling me back into its depths. I've had recurring nightmares ever since, where I'm fighting against the current, but I always sink, watching the light fade above me. It's no wonder I've been afraid of the water my entire life. Dying in the French Revolution. I had a vivid dream that I was part of a family of aristocrats in France. It felt like the late 18th century, and my entire family was targeted by revolutionaries. In the vision, I was a young woman, barely in my 20s, hiding in a grand estate. We could hear the crowds outside, and my father was frantically trying to organize an escape. But it was too late. The mob broke in, dragging us into the streets. I remember the cobblestones beneath my feet as they pulled me through the square. The scene shifted, and the next thing I knew, I was standing at the base of the guillotine. I can still feel the cold metal around my neck, and the last thing I saw was the sky turning red before everything went black. Memories of the Sahara. For years, I've had a recurring vision of being lost in the desert, wandering beneath the scorching sun. During a regression session, the memory became clearer. I was a merchant traveling across the Sahara in a caravan. We had been attacked by bandits, and I was left behind, wounded and without supplies. The heat was unbearable, and the sand stretched endlessly in all directions. I remember collapsing, the weight of the sun pressing down on me, sand filling my lungs. My death was slow, but it wasn't painful, just an overwhelming sense of isolation. I think about it every time I see vast, open landscapes, and it fills me with a kind of quiet terror. It's strange because I've never lived anywhere near a desert in this life, yet the memory feels so real. The medieval battle. I have this strange memory of wearing heavy armor, standing in a battlefield. It felt medieval. Somewhere in Europe, maybe England. There were arrows flying everywhere, the sound of swords clashing, and the sky was overcast, the air thick with the smell of mud and blood. I could see my reflection in a shield, young but battle-hardened, my face smeared with dirt. The battle didn't last long. I was struck by an arrow in the chest. I remember falling, the weight of my armor pressing me into the mud. I looked up at the sky as everything went quiet around me. The cold was the last thing I felt, and then there was nothing. I've always been drawn to stories of knights in medieval times, and I wonder if this is why. The samurai's last breath. One of the most intense regressions I've experienced took me to ancient Japan. I was a samurai, loyal to a powerful lord. I could feel the weight of my armor, the katana at my side, and the honor I carried with me. It was during a time of great conflict, and I had been sent on a mission to protect my lord's territory. But things went wrong. I remember being surrounded by enemy warriors. I fought fiercely, but there were too many of them. I was cut down, and the last thing I saw was the cherry blossoms falling from the trees above, drifting in the wind as my vision blurred. The sense of failure was overwhelming, not because of my death, but because I couldn't fulfill my duty. To this day, I feel an inexplicable connection to Japanese culture and the code of honor it upholds. The fire that took everything. Fire has always terrified me, even though I've never had any traumatic experiences with it in this life. During a past life regression, I discovered why. I was living in a small village, maybe somewhere in Eastern Europe, in what felt like the early 19th century. One night, the entire village was engulfed in flames. I remember running through the streets, the heat unbearable, trying to find my family. The smoke was so thick I could barely see. I made it to my house, but it was too late. Everything was burning. I collapsed just inside the doorway, the flames closing in around me. The sensation of burning alive was something I'll never forget, even though it was just a vision. It left me with a deep fear of fire that lingers to this day. The fall of the pharaoh. This memory came to me during a regression session, and it was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. I was living in ancient Egypt, working as a servant in the palace of a powerful pharaoh. I remember the grandeur of the palace, the way the sun shone down on the golden walls. There was a rebellion brewing, and I was caught in the middle of it. The palace was attacked, and I was killed in the chaos, struck down by a rebel soldier as I tried to flee. The strange part is, even though I was a servant, I felt this deep connection to the pharaoh, like we were tied together in some way. It's left me with an intense fascination with Egyptian history, and I often wonder if there's more to that life than I've remembered. The endless forest. Since I was a child, I've had dreams of running through a dense forest, heart-pounding, branches whipping against my face. In my regression, I realized that I had been a hunter in a past life, living in a small village on the edge of an ancient woodland. One day, I was tracking an animal deep into the forest when I was attacked by a wild beast. I never saw what it was, but I remember the fear, the sudden pain, and the sound of my own breath as it faded into silence. I've always had an irrational fear of being alone in the woods, and now I understand why. The memory of that life haunts me every time I step into the wilderness. The forgotten poet. In another life, I was a poet living in a grand, crumbling city. It felt like it was somewhere in southern Europe, maybe Italy or Greece, during a time of great political unrest. I spent my days writing, pouring my soul onto parchment, but I was poor and often went without food. One day, I fell ill. Tuberculosis, perhaps. I remember coughing blood into a handkerchief, knowing my time was running out. I died alone in a cold, dark room, my final poem unfinished beside me. The sadness I felt in that moment has lingered with me in this life, a deep melancholy I can't quite explain. It's as if I'm still searching for the words I never got to write. The woman in the tower. This memory is hazy, but I was locked in a tower, somewhere high above the ground. I was a woman, possibly royalty, held prisoner by my own family. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of betrayal. One day, I decided to end my own life. I climbed out of the tower window and let myself fall. The sensation of falling was terrifying, but there was also a sense of release, of freedom. I've always been afraid of heights, and now I think I understand why. The fear isn't just about falling, it's about the loss of control, the feeling of being trapped, and the desperate need to escape. The silent monastery. Death behind monastery walls. I've always been drawn to silence. Long stretches of quiet give me peace. During a regression session, I found myself living in a remote monastery, somewhere in the mountains of Tibet, or perhaps in a secluded part of Europe. I was a monk, spending my days in contemplation, performing rituals in solitude. The vision was peaceful until the final moments. I remember standing at the edge of a cliff, watching a storm roll in, the sky dark and heavy. There was an avalanche. The monastery was destroyed in a matter of minutes, and I, along with my brothers, was buried under the snow. The suffocating cold was the last thing I felt. I often think that's why I've been so fearful of confined spaces and snow in this life. It's the memory of that cold, silent burial. The knight who fell in love. In a past life, I was a knight, bound by duty to protect a royal family. I remember the weight of my armor, the sound of hooves on cobblestone as I rode through the castle grounds. But the vision took a turn when I saw myself falling in love with someone I could never have. Perhaps a noblewoman, or even the queen herself. It was forbidden, and I knew it. I was killed in battle soon after, struck down by an enemy's blade, but my last thoughts were of her. That unfulfilled love has haunted me in this life as a strange, lingering sadness. Like there's something or someone I've lost, but can't remember. It's made me wonder if unresolved emotions follow us from life to life, waiting for a chance to heal. The pirate's betrayal. I never thought I'd have been a pirate, but in one regression, I saw myself sailing the high seas. I was part of a crew, fierce and reckless, searching for treasure. I remember the salt air and the sound of the waves against the ship. But what struck me most was the betrayal. In my vision, I was betrayed by my crew, stabbed in the back, quite literally, during an argument over stolen gold. I was thrown overboard, left to drown in the endless ocean. The feeling of betrayal was overwhelming, not just the pain of the wound, but the deep sense of abandonment. To this day, I struggle with trust in close relationships, and I think that life might be the reason why. The painter's end. I've always had an inexplicable love for art, even though I'm not an artist in this life. During a past life regression, I found myself in Renaissance Italy, working as a painter in a small workshop. I wasn't famous, but I was passionate about my craft, spending hours perfecting the details of portraits and landscapes. However, I was very poor and often went without food. I remember dying alone in my studio, my hands stained with paint. I was weak from hunger and illness, but there was a strange peace in my final moments. I looked at my unfinished canvas and smiled, knowing that, even in death, my work would outlive me. That memory has left me with a deep connection to art, even though I've never pursued it as a career in this life. The Witch of the Woods. One of the most intense memories I've had during regression was of a life where I was accused of witchcraft. It was the 1600s, in a small village on the edge of a dark forest. I lived alone, making herbal remedies for the townspeople, but rumors spread that I was using dark magic. One cold night, a mob came for me, dragging me out of my small cottage. I remember the terror as they tied me to a stake and set the wood below me on fire. The flames licked at my skin, and the last thing I saw was the crowd watching as the smoke rose into the sky. I've carried an irrational fear of being persecuted or blamed for things I didn't do ever since. It's something that stays with me, even though I know it's from a lifelong past.